What better way to start the new year by continuing my favorite series, Zoos and Zoos, where we explore parasites that are found in animals in captivity. And today we're going to an aquarium in Indonesia. Parasites in captive fish are commonly reported in tanks owned by private hobbyists. But what about parasites in fish in a much more controlled environment like a public aquarium? That has been less studied. These researchers examined fish for ectoparasites in different types of holding tanks at this aquarium, and they found 9 different parasite species in 5 distinct groups. They did find a couple of single-celled protozoans as well as crustaceans called copepods. But what's really cool is that they found 4 different species of monogenean worms. These are fish gill parasites, and they're very common. And they are some of the coolest looking worms out there with these attachment organs that look like weird claws. These attachment organs are so distinct from other species that monogeneans will actually occupy different parts of the gill as a form of niche partitioning. A couple of things that I found interesting about this study is that they did not find any tapeworms or acanthocephalans. Those are also common fish parasites. And also the fact that they found parasites in the touch pool kind of makes me laugh. Wish I could pet parasites. Now, ectoparasites are not particularly fatal to the fish, but it's still important to know about them because we still want to prevent any outbreaks. And this paper is just another example of no matter how controlled you think your environment is, parasites will always find a way in. It's about time for another Zoos and Zoos where we look at parasites found in zoo animals, because when you go to a zoo, there may be a hidden bonus zoo that you don't see. And today we're going to a zoo in Florida. I say a zoo because I actually don't know which one this occurred at. But the incident in question involves Komodo dragons, specifically a tick infestation. There was an outbreak of an exotic tick species that infected 3 Komodo dragons, again, at a Florida zoo. It never really specifies which one. And I tried looking up which zoos in Florida have Komodo dragons, and it appears to be pretty much all of them, so it didn't really help to narrow it down. What's interesting about this tick species is that you'll see that the genus is called Apanama. These are tick species that commonly infect reptiles, and they do look like your basic tick. The weird thing about Apanama, though, is that it's actually a subgenus, which I feel like you don't come across those as often. I've heard of plenty of subspecies, but a subgenus is a bit more rare. But I digress. This paper was to develop a method to control the tick infestation of the Komodo dragons. They developed another concentration of the pesticide permethrin, which is used for controlling ticks and lice. First, they treated the outdoor enclosure of the Komodo dragons, and then they let the lizards out, where they then treated the indoor enclosure. And after about 6 months of treatment, tick numbers went down from 301 to 0. So it's pretty safe to say that this method was effective at controlling the tick outbreak. Welcome to Zoos and Zoos Part 8, where we look at parasites in zoo animals, and today we're going to a big one. This incident happened in 1985 where a man went to SeaWorld, and a couple days later he noticed an irritation in his eye. The pain eventually got so bad that the man had to go to the doctor, where they found something rather peculiar. Just beneath his eyelid was this microscopic mite. Now, humans are no strangers to face mites. This is Demodex, a microscopic mite that lives on our faces. Now, there's some debate on whether or not Demodex is actually parasitic or commensal, but that's for a different video. But that's not what this is. This is not Demodex. This is not a human parasite. And it's definitely not anything like what his eye doctor has seen. Get it? So his doctor sent this specimen off to have it identified by a parasitologist. And what they learned is that this is a nasal mite of pinnipeds, so seals, sea lions, and walruses. So the obvious next question from the doctor is, how did you end up with a walrus parasite in your eye? Turns out, I guess back in the 80s, you were allowed to get pretty up close to some of the animals. And this guy got up close, face to face with a walrus, which then proceeded to sneeze on him. And that is how a human ends up with a walrus parasite, which is a pretty rare phenomenon. It's so rare, in fact, that a scientific paper was published because of it. The first, and as far as I know, only case of a pinniped parasite infecting a human. So if you ever want to go down in science history, just get infected by a weird parasite. It's time for part 9 of Zoos and Zoos, where we talk about parasites in zoo animals. And this is a topic I've actually covered before, but it's important to talk about it again, especially in this series. The California condor is one of the most well-known endangered species on Earth. They were so endangered, in fact, that in the late 80s, the last remaining individuals were brought from the wild into zoos for breeding programs. There was only a couple dozen at the time. Condors were split between the Los Angeles Zoo and San Diego. Now, this species is still technically endangered, but the breeding programs have been a success with over 500 individuals out in the wild today. However, those original birds that were brought in from the wild also had a species of louse associated with them. This species is called Colpocephalum californicii, and they are only found on California condors. When those original condors were brought in from the wild to the zoo, they were given delousing medication. This not only got rid of the bird's lice, but it made the whole species go extinct. And it's not the first time this has happened. We've also annihilated the louse species that infects Iberian lynx and the scimitar horned oryx. This phenomenon is known as conservation-induced extinction, where we end up annihilating an entire species to save another. Luckily, we have learned better since then, and we know that parasites play a role in the ecosystem just like every other species, and more people are starting to recognize their value. To the point where we scientists are working on a global parasite conservation plan. Because if you're trying to save a species, you should also try to save the ones that live in on it. Welcome to part 10 of Zoos and Zoos, where we look at parasites and zoo animals. And today involves going back in time and a case of mistaken identity. During the 1930s, the London Zoo had a very special animal. They had the last living thylacine. Now, thylacines are going to do what all animals do, and that means pooping. Sometimes zoos will collect poop to assess the health of their animals, and something in the thylacine poop was actually preserved. Now, the last living thylacine died in the late 30s, but a biologist from the early 70s was looking at preserved samples of thylacine poop inside of vials, and he found a brand new species of nematode. Or did he? Now, also like all other animals, thylacines have parasites. Some of those parasites are still with us, but many of them went extinct with the thylacine. Upon closer examination, it was found that this nematode was actually already a known species, and a very common one at that. This was a species of nematode that commonly infects pigeons. And rather this nematode being a new species, it's most likely that a pigeon got into the thylacine enclosure, or the thylacine proceeded to eat it. The mistake was corrected about a year later, so it wasn't a new species of parasite, but still kinda cool.